Before I begin, I just have to say that I deserve the credit for my sister Isabella's marriage to John Knightley. They have known each other for ages, but I'm the one that planted ideas in their mind of matrimony. Secondly, I do deserve the credit for the match between Miss Taylor, my governess, and Mr. Weston. Mr. Knightley, well, John Knightley's brother, George, doesn't approve of my matchmaking. He says it's meddlesome and gossipy. But I can't help it. Now I have a new protégée, Harriet Smith. She's a girl of lower status than myself, but we're coming along nicely. I'm looking at matches for her as well. Just the other day, though, she told me she was quite in love with Mr. Robert Martin, who happens to be a farmer. Oh, detestable, a commoner. You'd think she'd at least fall in love with someone of higher status than herself, a gentleman who can inherit some money without having to work for it. But no, Mr. Robert Martin, a farmer. Oh, Harriet. I must compose myself. It was very shocking when she told me. Very shocking indeed. However, I have picked out for her a different match, a Mr. Elton. He's planning on going into the ministry. He's quite handsome and has a considerable income. I think he'll be perfect for Harriet. Doesn't approve of my matchmaking. He says it's meddlesome and gossipy. But I can't help it. It's so fun! He says it's meddlesome and gossipy and that I belong with a bunch of old ladies, which is injurious to my conscience. Which is injurious to me. Robert Martin proposed to Harriet Smith. Proposed! As soon as she told me, I said, reject him, he's not good enough for you. Because he isn't. She deserves someone much better than that. She deserves a gentleman. Proposed. Robert Martin, Harriet Smith. When I told Mr. Knightley, he was extremely vexed and told me it was not my business to go around telling people who they should marry. But Harriet deserves so much better and I know it. And I don't care what Mr. Knightley thinks. I don't. I don't care what he thinks. I don't care. But I told Harriet not to accept him. And I don't care if Mr. Knightley thinks that was right or not. It was right. Harriet deserves Mr. Elton. In fact, Mr. Elton gave me a romantic riddle. I, of course, figured it out, and it meant courtship and marriage, and it was definitely directed at Harriet. I have cause to believe she would be married to Mr. Elton by the spring. I told her so, as hopefully it convinces her more of Robert Martin's inadequacy and Mr. Elton's perfection. I don't care what Mr. Knightley thinks. I don't care. I said Mr. Knightley proposed to Harriet. Oh my gosh. Tonight, after the Westons' Christmas party, Mr. Elton proposed, not to Harriet, to me. I was astounded. Mr. Elton proposed to me. He hadn't loved Harriet at all. He had only loved me and seen Harriet as a way to get through. Oh, Mr. Elton, all of my perfect plans for Harriet are ruined, and not only that, I'm distraught. The fact that Mr. Elton would propose to me and not to Harriet. I told her, and she was so sad. She started crying the moment I told her. I thought it would be best to leave. I think I'll visit her soon, but I feel as if it's my fault for leading her to think that Mr. Elton would propose to her. I can't believe he proposed to me. It was one of the awkwardest things I've ever done in my life. Of course, I did reject him. I have no feelings for Mr. Elton at all. I told her, and she was... and not to me. I told her, and she was terrified. Okay. Today, I took Harriet to visit Miss Bates. Her niece Jane Fairfax is back in town. Jane Fairfax. Quite a annoying young lady. Her complexion is just atrocious. I've never seen a face like hers. Some call her fair, but I don't think so. Jane cut short her trip to Ireland with the Campbells. Apparently, Miss Campbell's fiancé, Mr. Dixon, saved Jane from narrowly falling off a cliff into the ocean. I was astounded. I think perhaps Jane and Mr. Dixon had a romantic attachment some time ago. Perhaps I'll be able to match-make those two as well. Although there is the slight problem of him being Miss Campbell's fiancé, but I'm sure we'll get over that. Also, a Mr. Frank Churchill just recently arrived in town to visit his father. He's been trying to come for some time now, but his aunt would not allow him to. I was rather excited because Frank seems a charming and lively young man. Anyway, Frank told me that he already knew Jane Fairfax from their time at Weymouth. I was quite astounded, as I thought that Frank Churchill, a man of incredibly lively disposition, would not be inclined to spend time with Miss Jane Fairfax, who is of more sallow and mild disposition. Mr. Frank Churchill is quite a character, perhaps exactly what this town needs, but Mr. Knightley doesn't seem to think very highly of him. I think perhaps Mr. Knightley's jealous that I pay more attention to Frank, although I don't know why that would make sense. Frank is a lovely young man, though. Apparently, Mr. Campbell's fiancé. I hope not. Anyway, Frank, a man of such cheerful disposition, would not be inclined to hang out with Jane, yo. Everyone was invited to a party at the Coles house. When I arrived, Miss Cole told me that Jane Fairfax received a piano as a present. She thinks it's from Mr. Campbell, but Frank and I were speculating that it's not indeed from Mr. Campbell, but from Mr. Dixon and their secret romantic attachment. That's all speculation, of course. However, Miss Taylor, my governess, suggested that Mr. Knightley might be thinking about getting married after all and have sent the present as an invitation to courtship to Jane or something. I find that highly unlikely. Mr. Knightley getting married? No, it could never happen like that. I don't think. I hope not. Frank and I were both speculating that it's from Mr. Dixon and their secret romantic attachment. Oh, how exciting. I think it might be from Mrs. Oh my goodness. Okay. Frank Churchill proposed a ball. However, it had to be cancelled when his aunt took sick suddenly and he had to return to London. Before he left, he asked to speak to me alone. I thought for sure he was going to propose. So did Miss Taylor. She told me I should be expecting it. But he didn't. He only said goodbye. He didn't actually propose, as I had thought. I don't know why I'm so upset. There was no attachment between Frank and I. I was very disappointed and flustered. I thought for sure he would, but I think I'm more in love with Frank than he is with me. I guess I truly was in love with Frank Churchill after all. Miss Taylor told me that when Frank asked to speak to me alone. Forgot about that. Frank asked to speak to me alone. Okay, whatever. You don't forget something like that. Mr. Elton's new bride, Augusta, arrived in Highbury this afternoon. I felt compelled to hold a dinner party to celebrate her arrival, but I personally find her detestable. I told Mr. Knightley, and he said I would be uncharitable towards her, but she's an awful person, and to make poor Harriet feel so unloved. I can't believe Mr. Elton would snub Harriet for her. Harriet's quite distraught over the fact that Mr. Elton and his bride are back. I feel so sorry for the poor girl. Frank is back for the ball, and I'm very excited to see him again. I haven't seen him for so long. I wonder what it will be like to see him again. It's altogether quite confusing, this whole affair. But I never any... Ah, that was stupid.
It's not even like dark.
I know. We went to bed early back then. Frank arrived back from his aunt's house today, and at the ball I discovered I'm not nearly in love with him as I first supposed. He was a kind gentleman and all, but I don't think there was really any romantic attachment between us at all. I'm rather relieved, actually. It's good to just be friends with Frank. Mr. Elton was also at the ball, and Harriet was there. Mr. Elton rudely snubbed Harriet when she had no one to dance with. He wouldn't even look at her, let alone ask her to dance. Thankfully, Mr. Knightley saved the day. It was such a kind thing for him to do for poor Harriet. She was all alone, and Mr. Knightley came up and asked her to dance. I know it made the night better for her. Harriet was rudely snubbed by Mr. Elton. She was dancing with no one. She was the only wallflower in the entire room, and Mr. Elton wouldn't even look at her. I suppose I don't love him after all. It was only feelings. It wasn't anything real. I had to look at the paper. Harriet Smith, my Harriet Smith, arrived at my house today, carried in none other than Frank Churchill's arms. Frank Churchill and Harriet! Apparently, she was mugged by a band of gypsies who tried to take her money and would have killed her if Frank hadn't shown up and saved the day. My Harriet and Frank Churchill. Later on, Harriet told me that she's set her sights on one who is far above her. I think it's Frank. Frank Churchill and Harriet Smith. It's a perfect match. And of course, give credit where credit is due. Oh, this is so exciting. Finally, someone of high status for Harriet Smith to marry. A gentleman. And Frank of all people! Frank! And Harriet! Also, Mr. Knightley has suggested that a group of us take a trip up to Box Hill for a picnic. I'm quite excited. We're leaving tomorrow, and we'll be gone all day. Hopefully, Harriet and Frank both come, because I have more matchmaking to do. in carriages for a picnic. No, in automobiles. They were invented now. I'm very excited for this trip because I'm homeschooled and I've never been out of my town. I don't know. Mr. Knightley suggested a trip to Box Hill for a picnic, as you may remember. Well, Mr. Weston invited Miss Elton, Augusta Elton, Mr. Elton's new bride. One of her carriage horses went lame, so we were all forced to retire to Mr. Knightley's estate and pick strawberries. It was a disappointment to us all, I assure you. Anyway, Frank Churchill passed Jane Fairfax an anagram spelling out Dixon, who we all supposed to be her former lover. Jane was quite upset and fled the room in a tizzy. Afterwards, Mr. Knightley asked me what was in the letter. He supposes them to be madly in love. Madly in love. I very soon set him straight, saying that Frank pays the slightest indifference to Jane. Doesn't pay her any attention at all. She insisted upon staying behind because one of her carriage horses was lame, and in an attempt to be polite, the rest of the party decided to stay behind with her. Anyway, Frank passed Jane Churchill. Jane Churchill, Jane Fairfax. No one enjoyed the trip to Box Hill. I'm afraid I acted shamefully on my part. Frank and I flirted outrageously, and we brought grief to Miss Bates by insulting her. When Mr. Knightley confronted me on it, I went and visited Miss Bates in town and apologized to her for behaving so abhorrently. She said that Jane refused to see me, and that Jane had cried herself to sleep last night because she has accepted the post of governess from Miss Elton. On my way home I ran into Mr. Knightley, who said he was going up to London for a few weeks and wouldn't be back. He was listless and didn't act quite himself at all, and I'm afraid all of this is all my fault. She has accepted the post of governess from Miss Elton, Robert Elton's new bride. His name's not Robert, is it?
Just Mr. Elton, I don't think.
Mr. Elton, not Robert Martin. You didn't video that, did you?
Maybe. Maybe not.
Frank's controlling aunt has died of an illness and he is now free to marry as he chooses. I had hoped he would choose Harriet, but I was shocked to discover that he and Jane Fairfax have been secretly engaged these 12 months since their time at Weymouth. I was shocked. And to think of his outrageous conduct towards me and towards Jane, always snubbing her, paying her the slightest indifference, and yet flirting with me. Jane, however, had given up hope of Frank ever re-loving her, so she accepted the governess position. But now she's given it up and their engagement has become public. Miss Taylor assumed that I would be distraught, but I'm not at all. I did not love Frank. I was afraid that Harriet would be terribly distraught because she had set her sights on someone above her station, but no. She had not set her sights on Frank, but on Mr. Knightley. Mr. George Knightley, my Mr. Knightley! And Harriet! It's preposterous! I told Harriet that Mr. Knightley of all people would be the least to encourage a girl if he didn't love her. She seems to think that he loves her back. If anyone was to marry Mr. Knightley, it would have to be me. Was Mr. Knightley, my Mr. Knightley, and Harriet. It's abhorrent! Harriet and I were both astounded at the news. Harriet was devastated. Wait, Harriet wasn't devastated.
You were devastated for Harriet.
I lied. Okay, wait, I got the order wrong too. Robert Martin proposed to Harriet Smith again, and she accepted. I'm so glad that the work that I tried to do so desperately failed. I see now that Robert and Harriet are perfect for each other, even if he is only a farmer. Also, Mr. Knightley returned back from London yesterday. He was convinced that I would be distraught over Frank's deceit to me, but I was relieved to see him. And then, you'll never guess what happened. Mr. Knightley proposed. To me! I'm engaged to George Knightley! Mr. Knightley proposed to me! I'm so stupid! Happy dance! Da 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 da, hey! Da 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 da, hey! Today, Harriet Smith, my Harriet Smith, arrived at my house carried in Frank Churchill's arms. Okay. Okay. Harriet said...
What happened to him?
I'm gonna read this really quick. Let me look at my paper. What was I gonna say?
What do you have to say about that noise?
This noise, as you may hear it, is an alien spaceship come to abduct you from the world. Take me to your leader. Wink, wink. Okay. Hello. Take 3. No, you didn't. Hi. You're the answering machine? It's quite a lovely dispositioned answering machine, quite like Frank Churchill. They're both lovely things and machines. In fact, Frank the robot has much in common with this answering machine. They both have antennas in the middle of their foreheads. I believe Frank Churchill just has one little pipe sticking out of his forehead. He's rather stupid, if you ask me. Just like the answering machine. And you. Just kidding, you're not stupid. At least, not that I know of. You are a camera, so that doesn't make very much sense, I'm sorry. Are you filming me? Why are you doing this? Are you watching me? I'm glad that the thing that I almost undid has finally been redone. That was stupid. I'm brushing my hair. Don't think I love Mr. Knightley. I hope not. He's ugly. She kisses my boo-boos. She brushes my hair. My mom is awesome. Mothers everywhere. A little less like a zombie and more like a person. Okay. My mom kisses my boo-boos. She brushes my hair. Thank you, mothers. We love you everywhere. Better? Nope. I don't know what else to say, other than I'm fabulous.